Secularists and atheists have no leg to stand on when they say, wait a second, Christians aren't allowed to push their power. Yes, they are. What the hell are you talking about, dude?
Well,
I have no idea what you're even talking about.
Morals that were derived from thousands of years ago, they're not congruent with our current standard of living.
Well, I think that this is unethical behavior.
What's unethical about it? And I don't think that we do need to separate out religious authority. I don't even think we can. How's he going to figure his policies out other than what he considers moral in his brain?
So...
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we're going to be watching Andrew Wilson take on a bunch of secularists on modern day debate regarding a question that often just gets dismissed, and it deserves to actually be debated a lot more because it's a completely reasonable position to take. Should Christians be able to use their Christian ethics to inform their policy decisions, particularly those in power? This is a great one. So with that, let's get into the first clip.
Christians have as much of a right to rule as secularists.
There we go. All right, so Christians have as much a right to rule as secular people.
Correct. Just to kind of, let me flesh it out a little bit for you very briefly.
Yeah.
So the idea is secularists say that only they seem to be able to have the power to push political authority. I push back against that idea and say, no, Christians also should be allowed to push political authority. And just because you're a secularist, it doesn't give you any additional right to have authority than a Christian does. So this idea of separation of church and state actually doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if Christians can push political authority, as is their right, then it seems that you're going to have Christians who are in the government and they are going to be ruling from their moral stance.
Okay, yeah, and I don't actually entirely disagree with this. I would say, though, when we're talking about Christians in authority, I think that usually what they're talking about, or the criticism, is less so that they're Christian and more so that they're operating under a dogmatic ideology. And so under that concept, like, do you think it's okay for people to use dogmas in a political sense?
Like the Constitution? Like that kind of dogma?
Why would the Constitution be dogmatic?
Well, what is a dogma? Let's start with that.
A dogma is an appeal to some sort of unchanging authority.
Is that what you think it is?
I believe it is.
Okay, so what is dogma? Dogma generally refers to positions or sets of beliefs that people are expected to believe without question or without doubt. This can be seen in religious, political, or any sorts of ideological systems. There are many different examples of dogma. Secularists use dogma all the time. I can think of examples such as church and state being one, actually. They dogmatically believe in the separation of these institutions. Democracy is a dogma for them. They are dogmatic about abortion and so much more. Yes, Christians have dogmas, but so does everybody else trying to push their worldview. So let's carry on, guys. But before we get there, don't forget to smash that like button. You may have noticed we're swimming against the tides in terms of shadow banning at the moment, so would appreciate it if you could leave your comments, smash the like button, and also subscribe.
Yeah, so let's look at this idea. We'll kind of flesh it out a little bit here. I think that it's fine. And by the way, that I'm not sure that the Constitution is able to be changed in certain parts of it, right? Or it stops becoming the Constitution. But I think the idea of what we have in America is dogmatic. The idea of, well, only secularists have the ability to rule because we have to separate out religious authority, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we do need to separate out religious authority. I don't even think we can. And so if politicians are going to rule from a moral stance, what's going to inform their morals? Well, it's going to be their religion and their dogma.
Right.
So if my dogma is informing my morals, aren't I supposed to rule from my dogma?
Well, so I think this is kind of like you can be dogmatic without appealing to a dogma, or you can be, I think a better way to put this, I think you can be secular as a Christian, right? So being secular, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty much just operating outside of religious context, right? So in government, for example, I don't think the Constitution is dogmatic because, as you mentioned, it's amendable. Something like the Bible, right? If that's your point of moral authority, I think you can operate under that. We all have some sort of moral system that we're appealing to. But I think that when push comes to shove, right, if there's an issue like evolution, for example, right, that's a lot of pushback in schools right now. I don't think that you can appeal to evolution being false purely because it contradicts the Bible. I mean, you technically can, but I don't think it's justifiable. Does that make sense? Because it's non-falsifiable. You can't, if you're just going to assume that the Bible is true as your foundation, that's operating dogmatically, and I don't think we can really make progress that way.
Yeah, but that's just assertions, right? Like, let's say that Christians did. Let's say they outlawed the teaching of evolution, right? So what? What would even your argument be? If the argument is we have to outlaw prayer, we have to move prayer out, we have to move God out of schools, we have to move these things out of schools, then when Christians are in charge, why shouldn't you be surprised when they say, oh, well, we're gonna move your stuff out.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna move your nonsense out of here, right?
I agree. Like, if Christians are in power, of course they have the authority to technically do whatever they want.
Yeah, but what my argument is that they have every much right. They have as much right to utilize that political power and authority as secularists do. Secularists and atheists have no leg to stand on when they say, wait a second, Christians aren't allowed to push their power. Yes, they are. If atheists are, Christians are too.
I agree. Maybe the better way to put it is they are legally allowed to. I don't know that they're, ethically you can do whatever you want as well, right? But I don't think it's ethically permissible. I think that this is unethical behavior.
What's unethical about it?
Well, so for example, right, if we're pushing out something like evolution, I think that leads to a lot of downstream effects as far as like anti-science
So does pushing out prayer.
How so?
Well, you would have to admit that when you were a kid, maybe not when you were a kid, but at least when I was a kid, we used to pledge allegiance to the flag, right?
Yes.
One nation under God. So it gives a reinforcement of patriotism, an idea of solidarity with your countrymen, right? And prayer in school also creates solidarity between people. It gives them purpose, gives them faith. There's all sorts of negative ramifications of pushing it out, right? Oh.
Wow, that goes quick. All right.
So it's really not a good argument to make that it is unethical for Christians to use their Christian beliefs to inform their politics. First of all, how do you actually make that argument and then not make it in reverse? That secularists are also unethical for using their secular worldview to inform their politics. That actually doesn't make any sense. Moreover, when you speak about politics, you're speaking about the governance of society. And the governance of society is shaped by individuals and shaped by groups of people with various different moral frameworks to ultimately achieve the best outcomes for the most amount of people. You can't engage with politics without engaging with ideas of justice, morality, law and order, good and evil, etc. So if you are a Christian, how is it even possible to honestly engage with politics without using Christian ethics? It's not. Now on to the next part, which is a great example of someone who really hasn't thought this through. And I actually think that this represents a lot of people.
Go ahead.
All right. So your stance is Christians have the right to rule as much as secularists?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a Christian, I can't disagree with you too much on that. However, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you shouldn't be in power. But what you do with your morals and values should not be portrayed in how you rule. I'm a big believer in church and state. Or separation of church and state. So, there's a place for the religious aspect of your life and your upbringing and all that, but it shouldn't be brought into more of a power stance.
You can't separate church and state. Let me explain why. Have you ever elected a politician who's a Christian?
Yes.
Did you expect that when he ruled from his moral stances, which were informed by Christianity?
I would expect that he would have ruled based off of his policies, which...
What? How's he going to figure his policies out other than what he considers moral in his brain?
So...
Yeah. How's he going to figure his policies out unless he figures it out through what he thinks is moral in his brain? As I said before, if you're a Christian and you're engaging with politics in an honest way, then you must do this. And generally speaking, you're going to refer to your Christian ethics. The only way in which I can think that you would do this without your Christian ethics informing your policies is if you go completely against those ethics, or what you consider to be right, or if you're just told what to think and what to do, and you don't use your own free will and moral agency.
Just give me a second here.
Sure. Take your time.
So I feel like the specific people that I would vote for or elect, his policies would specifically be how I would feel would not be based off of his Christian morals. And that's how I vote.
So where do you want him to find his morals? Like in the trash can, or like if you're electing a person to be who's a Christian into office, right? Where do you want him to get his information for how he's going to rule morally? If you're a Christian and you point to some other stance and say that's more moral than my stance, then why are you a Christian?
Give me a second. Shit.
So, I mean, respect to this guy for getting up here and doing this. It's not easy to be put on the spot like this, but his position is just something that is so easily debunked and actually just torn apart with a few simple questions.
Where do you want him to get his information for how he's going to rule morally?
And this is why he's struggling to answer so much. He's having a moment of cognitive dissonance. What he actually thinks and what he believes is actually not congruent with what he's espousing. And I've been through that, what he's going through right now. It's this really uncomfortable moment when you realize that the position you've taken is actually self-defeating or just not in alignment with what you actually believe.
Can you say that last part?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you elect somebody to represent you in your morals in government who's a Christian, why would you want him to rule from another stance other than Christianity? You would be then saying that other stance is more moral than his. So why would you be a Christian to begin with?
I mean, being a Christian is kind of, personally, it's more of a comfort for me,
Okay.
knowing that there's a higher power, a creator.
But it doesn't inform your morals?
Where my morals come from is kind of a collective of what you were talking with FTFE yesterday, a collective of experiences and I do lean.
So Christianity is purely cosmetic for you?
I tend to hope it's not, but
I mean, it sounds like it's purely cosmetic and you're getting your moral information from intuition. Like, oh, this feels good, this doesn't feel good. But Christian ethics come from the teachings and dogmas of Jesus Christ, right? The laid foundations of Jesus Christ. And if you move against those, you're moving into Antichrist territory, right? You're being Antichrist. So, you can't like pick and choose Christian ethics, right?
That's a fair assessment. Man, all right, I gotta concede.
Okay.
This isn't really a topic that I discussed too
It's okay.
much, but it was a. Awesome.
No problem.
So, I mean, this is a good question to really think about. What exactly are the reasons, especially for people who consider themselves Christians, to reject the notion that people in power can utilize Christian ethics to inform their political decisions? I mean, I personally believe that it's the highest form of ethics. It's the most virtuous and the most beneficial for the most amount of people, and also that it's objectively true. So I have no problem whatsoever with somebody genuinely using that who is in a position of power. So on to the next one. This guy is a fallacy machine. Now, he's not a professional debater like Andrew is. He doesn't know the rules of the chessboard like Andrew does, but lots of fallacies here, so we will point them out.
Me too.
So what's up? You think we should establish laws based on Christian ethics?
Yep.
Does
Yeah.
that go against the Constitution?
No.
14th,
What part of the Constitution?
14th Amendment?
Like, and what in the 14th Amendment would we be violating?
The fact that we shouldn't establish laws based on religious belief?
There's nothing in the 14th Amendment that says we can't establish law based on our religious beliefs.
There's definitely nothing in the 14th Amendment that states that you can't establish laws based on religious beliefs. The 14th Amendment, if anything, actually just protects religious freedoms. And one of those freedoms would be that your religion can inform your politics. In fact, the Constitution does not prohibit politicians from using their religious beliefs to shape their views or guide their vote and policies at all.
So do you think that the morals established by Christianity in the Bible have not evolved since based on secular humanism?
Wait, say that again?
Do you not think that morals established in the Bible have not evolved due to secular humanism.
Have not evolved?
Yeah, I feel like so we don't stone people to death. We don't kill people for not being virgins on their wedding day. What do you think that is?
What the hell does that have to do with my claim?
Oh, well, all right. Well, then elaborate on your claim.
Yeah, so I think that it's completely fine, completely appropriate for Christians who are in positions of power and authority to push their position, power, and authority based on their Christian ethical belief, even at the expense of atheists who don't really like that very much.
So how would you feel if we lived in a Islamic state and people were making laws based on the Islamic belief?
I wouldn't like it.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think that would be right, though?
Well, for that people culture, they do it now.
Do you think everyone
I
in
can't.
that culture is
There's
happy
no
with
way
that?
for me to establish, other than through Christianity, for me to say, well, they're not Christians and they're not ruling from a Christian ethic, so that's wrong. But from an atheist perspective for governance, you couldn't say that they were doing a damn thing wrong. What is actually a problem with their population having Sharia law? Even why would what's even an atheist objection to that?
Well, I think that morals that were derived from thousands of years ago just are they're not congruent with our current standard of living.
So morals that were established 30 years ago are?
Yeah, I think they're continually evolving, yeah.
So this is fallacious here. Just because something is old doesn't make it worse. That's just a typical progressive fallacy, and Andrew rips through it in a few minutes' time. But there are many aspects of the modern world which are definitely newer, which I would say are definitely less ethical, such as rates of abortion, transgenderism, sexual ethics, and more. I would say that our ancestors were a lot better in some of these areas than we are. So just because it's newer doesn't mean it's better. And furthermore, he's actually not understanding the critique that Andrew's putting forward here when he's saying what's actually wrong with these Muslims having Sharia law, which is to say, from the secular atheist perspective, that's morally relative and in terms of its prescriptions about morality is ultimately arbitrary. What is wrong with a country choosing to govern under Sharia law, or through the Bible for that matter? These people, and especially the secular humanists, will often say, well, it's about human thriving, and it's about democracy, and it's about the will of the people, and it's about reducing harm as much as possible. So if the people of Afghanistan choose to run their country that way because they believe that it ticks all those boxes, then what's your objection to that? So once again, the appeal to something being old being swiftly debunked. I mean, the Socratic method, thousands of years old. People still use that a lot. And furthermore, for the secular humanists, one of the people who laid the groundwork for humanism was Aristotle, who put an emphasis on reason, naturalism, and human flourishing. Others include Voltaire, Hume, and Kant, and they're not exactly modern philosophers. And last one, he does an appeal to hypocrisy at the end there, saying, well, do you follow the 10 commandments? And even if Andrew didn't, and if he fell short of some of the commandments, he wouldn't be a hypocrite to say that the nation should be governed according to them still. If I robbed a bank and then went to prison and said, guys, you shouldn't rob a bank, I would not be wrong about that. So on to the last guy now. And when we were at DebateCon, actually, this guy was here and he spurged out at the lunch table to Andrew for about half an hour, and it was pretty confusing and kind of entertaining as well.
It doesn't exist, bro. It's made up in your head.
What if
never happened?
What if it wasn't written down, but it was implied? Just like, but yes, it was implied by all the other evidence. Hey! You need to see the other evidence too that I bring forth. If I were to go in court, I will win. I will win.
And pretty much the same in this following exchange.
So, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I think that it's that Christians have as much right to rule as secularists or atheists.
So my answer is going to be yes, but no. We need to understand, we need to see to its fullest extent of what is Christian ethics in its totality, not because of a different sect of denomination, but we need to actually be precise because there's going to be consequences from each decision we make, which is self-evident what type of nation we live in today, where you have certain conservative Christians claim to be this nation is good, great, and greatest, but can that be tested? And if it were to be tested and it's proven that it's actually evil and corrupt, because what is the doctrine, dogmas, for example, the Declaration of Independence? I don't support the Declaration of independence, because it seems to be that's not the kingdom of God nor any representation of that, because it seems to be a declaration of dependence, proclamation in freedom versus proclamation in kingdom. Why? Because there's an actual leader, a king thereof kings. There's a reason behind that.
What the hell are you talking about, dude?
Well, there
I
has
have no idea what you're even talking about.
So some people were, they were doing some stuff, and then other people were like, hey.
Hey, look, I understand. Look,
Yeah.
to me, it seems like if Christians were to rule and were to lead, my question is, what type of Christian? Because obviously secular humanism, their fundamental foundation, their doctrinal substance cannot sustain.
What if we just started with something simple like the Ten Commandments?
The Ten Commandments? My question would be, are there anything prior to the Ten Commandments that we have to account for? And if we don't do that,
I'm sure there's things prior that you'd have to account for, but let's just say that we started with that.
well, it has to come, well, there has to be, if we account for the Ten Commandments, we need to know the reason why behind each commandment itself, from the beginning to the end. So we have the totality of reason that is logical and rational to persuade people to submit themselves to obedience, to uphold that all the way through their life. But as for this nation, we don't do that. There's problems with freedom in itself, because you're allowing free will domain with corrupt individuals where technically we are.
Don't do that stuff. And then other people are like, hey, yeah, they should do, that stuff. It's good that they're doing that stuff. And then the other people are like, I don't think they should be doing that stuff.
We're basically children who has been given an unlawful, knowledgeable wisdom to be unwise as an option. And then we
Do you
didn't
take medication by chance?
medication. Oh, not at all. Unless I'm breathing air, that's a certain type of
Okay.
medication I'm
All
happy
right.
with.
Okay.
I mean, I desire truth at its
I
fullest
literally just don't have any idea what the hell you're talking about. Like, I
That's-
can't follow even
you-
what you're saying.
Okay, so should Christians rule
Yeah.
instead of
Yes.
secular humanism? Yes, but no. There's a contingency plan behind that. I say yes to a Christian, but how can I trust that Christian when his Christian ethics are corrupt along the way, or has been corrupt from the very beginning? Because that Christian
Yeah, but
straight
that would
off-
just apply to anybody. How can you trust anybody? Anybody their ethics could have been corrupted along the way. Anybody could have a problem with,
And-
X, Y, and Z.
and
That really doesn't have anything to do with anything, though, right?
well, what's
Not
the
gonna-
what's
why
the point of
draft
trust?
any law? I mean, some people are going to violate them.
Well, the point of a law is to be true.
No, that's not the point of a law. Is to be true.
Yes, to have a true sense of what is truth, that is good, that is deemed to be applied on the individuals, groups of individuals in this
So
domain.
you should
dominion.
stop at a stop sign is true.
Because and for the cause and effect, it depends. Stop
So,
adding
well-
at a stop sign. You're not only
Well,
taking
then-
care of yourself, you're taking care of people around
But
you.
isn't
and
it also true
right
that you
away.
can blow through a stop sign and nothing happens?
Then you because of your failure and nothing happens, you were lucky that something you avoided.
So it sounds like laws are there to restrict behavior based on outcomes that could be bad.
Correct, and
Yeah.
it can be prevented.
But that really doesn't have anything to do with a truth claim exactly, does it?
Well, it does play a part of truth.
Yeah, like if we had a law that said when you walked indoors to this particular building, you have to take your hat off. If you left your hat on, what would be the negative consequence of that?
Well, why would they have the law in the first
Who
place? It would be
cares?
courtesy.
Let's just say they do.
Well, it should care, and that's my point. Either it's 100% or it's nothing.
Yeah, but let's just say they did.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
What's the truth we're trying to establish here? There's no truth claim we're trying to establish.
Interaction, maybe courtesy, professional or personal, in a way, in a manner of a format that could exist in the actually ideal, real world that we live in, that it can be that possible way of living, that courtesy can be drawn from the law's reflection of what is desired, intended.
I'm lost again, dude.
Oh, my apologies.
In conclusion, I have no idea.
So, if anybody can decipher the cryptic message hidden within what he was saying there, I would love to know. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, guys, subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.